The Prime Minister was right when he said over the last years, you've seen an increase in spending of about 7%. That's not sustainable.
A Carney cabinet retreat and a conversation with President Donald Trump. It would seem Prime Minister Mark Carney is busy in advance of Parliament resuming its sitting in a couple of weeks. Hello, I'm Adrienne Batra. With me are Brian Lilley and Lorrie Goldstein. So the cabinet retreat that the Carney Liberals had in Toronto, Brian, we got a little bit of information. The Prime Minister spoke to the media recently and said that they are going to be looking for austerity. An austere budget is coming, budget cuts in the offing, I suppose. He even talked about how it's the responsibility of the federal government to use taxpayers' dollars wisely. It's kind of music to our ears. For once, $1.5 trillion debt that Canada is carrying. But is there going to be any meat behind those bones?
We'll have to wait and see. This is my answer every time someone asks me about Mark Carney, because they talk a lot and they haven't delivered much yet. So it's always, we're promising to do something. It's a bit like Wimpy. I promise you, to pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. They're always out there in front promising something down the road. So look, the spending cut targets that we've heard are ambitious. Apparently 7.5% of program spending this year, then moving up to 10% next year and 15% the year after. Those aren't insignificant cuts, and they're the type of thing that you will feel. Large organizations can easily cut their budget by 5%, and most people will not notice. These cuts, people will notice. And so you hear Champagne talking about the public service and talking about adjustments.
You will find adjustments because you have to take it, when you look at these things, you have to look at the trend. We've been adding a lot of people over the last few years, during the COVID period. So you're looking at adjusting.
Oh, no, there's going to be layoffs. They're going to do all the things that they told the public servants in Ottawa who voted against the Conservatives, and specifically against the leader, Pierre Poilievre. They're going to do all the things they said, you better not vote Conservative or Pierre will do this. It's the right thing to do. I'm a little worried. I'm sure Lorrie is as well, because we've covered more budgets between us than we can count, that Carney's talk about splitting the budget into operating and capital, is that going to be used as some kind of sleight of hand to not cut as much as we need to, but still claim that there are big cuts, or to hide a massive deficit somewhere else and claim that the books are closer to balanced when they're not?
Those are the types of clever accounting that governments often do, Lorrie, to conceal what's really going on. But Carney noted that the federal government has been spending at a rate of over 7% per year for the last almost decade, of course, during Trudeau's era. And he acknowledged that it's not sustainable. So plenty of criticism to go towards Mark Carney, but maybe at minimum, he's a banker, he gets finances. Perhaps this is something that he's determined to make progress on, and that is reducing spending.
Well, remember, his election promise was not to reduce the spending of some departments by 15% cumulative over 3 years. The key one was to cap but not cut the public service. Well, at the time he said that, from 2015 to the time he said that, the federal bureaucracy had grown it got up as high as 43%, and then in the last year they cut about 10,000 positions, and so the time he said it, it was 40%. Now, if you're going to reduce the operating budget to what he said he would do in the election, less than 2%, an increase of less than 2% annually, compared to previous increases that were 3 to 4 or 5 times much of that, you're going to have to cut staff. Now, you can start with attrition, but what he said, we've done a lot of budgets. Every government says it's going to make billions of dollars of savings by increasing efficiency. But the problem, and the latest thing, Carney, the use of artificial intelligence. But what decades of attorney general's reports and parliamentary budget officers' reports have shown is that the federal government is incompetent when it comes to information technology. That's why all of these programs, green energy programs, we've seen go off the rails, because they're not capable of doing that kind of work. So what do? They hire consultants, and they don't really understand what the consultants are telling them, and that's why we get budgets that just explode all over the place. So it's not only an issue of numbers, it's also an issue of, can this government competently lower the number of staff, which will, of course, it'll impact services, while at the same time increasing efficiency so that we get better services overall. Based on experience, you would suggest that that's not going to happen. I hope it does. I think, it would be great if we can have, a more efficient, but also remember, he's also promised not to reduce transfers, entitlement programs. That's a huge part of the budget. And the last thing you both remarked on is this thing of, we're going to tell you about the budget in a new way. There's going to be operating expenses, which are the cost of government, and we're going to lower those so we can invest more in capital spending to finance major nation-building projects.
Ambition when it comes to investment, rigor when it comes to spending.
The problem is going to be, I'm going to have to watch very closely when this budget comes out. I mean, it's supposed to be October, but there's no date. How is he defining operating and capital? Because the sleight of hand you can do is to take what you define as capital spending, which is actually operating spending. So, he's got a hard nut to crack here. We'll see how well he does all the things he simultaneously promised.
It's a big ask, Brian, and it's going to be difficult to measure the success in the short term. These are long-term solutions to tame the debt, to tackle the deficit, and all of these things. He wants to refinance the debt that we have right now, which again, laudable. But I'm wondering, is there any sense though that the cabinet around him, the people around him, are on board with this, or is this just sort of they're begrudgingly doing it, and then at the end, when all is said and done, absolutely nothing changes?
Well, we saw the story from the National Post about the Stephanie Taylor, the reporter at National Post, being added to the group chat with senior political staffers in the office of Environment and Climate Change Minister Julie Debruzin. And what were they talking about? How they don't want to do the cuts. And they were even doing that classic thing that political staffers and bureaucrats do when they're told to make cuts and they don't want to, and they came up with something that everyone would notice. Well, what if we suggest that we cut the algae bloom containment program on the Great Lakes, and then everyone will notice, and then they demand that you spend more money? That's a classic thing. It's like when I've covered city halls and, well, we have to close all the waiting pools in the libraries. So you've got that. You've got a lot of incompetent ministers who, and people will think ministers don't matter, but they do, because they manage. Their job is to manage the departments, and a good minister managing the department makes a massive difference. Will they be able to do that, or is it going to be Carney in the center and Francois-Philippe Champagne forcing all of these things? We'll have to wait and see on that. In terms of dealing with the debt, let me give you a quick story. Ontario still spends too much, although they haven't gone as crazy in terms of year-over-year spending increases as the federal government. But one thing that Ontario Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy, a man with Wall Street and Bay Street experience, did is when interest rates were really low, he went out and he refinanced all of Ontario's debt at bargain basement rates, and he locked it in long term. So as everything would come up for renewal, he would refinance every time he could. The federal Liberals, with Chrystia Freeland as their finance minister at the time, didn't do that and kept going short term because, well, interest rates are low. They're going to stay low forever. And then they went up. What's the difference? Ontario's debt servicing ratio, it's about 6% to 7% of every dollar we send goes to service the debt. At the federal level, it went over 11. I'm not sure exactly where it is now, but it went over 11%. That is a massive difference. It may not sound like much, 6 to 7 to 11, but it means billions and billions of dollars. So maybe Frankie Bubble should go speak to Peter Bethlenfalvy and get some pointers.
Well, I think people get that, Brian, because we're in a time right now where people are their mortgages are coming up for renewal. So I think they understand that incremental 1-2% change, what a difference that certainly can make. But Lorrie, I want to sort of shift the conversation to another aspect of the cabinet retreat, and it's tied in with the budget, of course, and that is to do big nation building projects. And Carney just announced that there's going to be an office for this. There's going to be someone responsible for it. But we've heard nothing. We've heard nothing out of even the premier's meetings that happened in the last few weeks. Much touted broad discussions with leaders across the country, but nothing has been announced. Nothing has been brought forward. I mean, hurry up and wait.
Well, I think they wanted to have that kind of news coming out with Parliament resuming, people all back from vacation, so the public is looking. I have no doubt there will be nation building projects. The concern will be, what are they? What is going to, like? It's one thing to have, how many times in our business have we heard they're appointing a czar? So now there's going to be major projects czar. Like there's an information czar, and there's this czar and that czar. But it's only as good as Brian suggested, the competence of the people at the top. What is true is that the concern I have is, and look, polls show the nation's behind this for a whole bunch of reasons, including reducing our dependency on the United States. So the public is there, but we've seen what happens when governments rush through huge projects, mega billions of dollars, without proper oversight. Now they're saying, look, we can streamline the process and still have the oversight. Well, even under the old oversight, you created problems that were a disaster on a number of fronts. So there's that concern. And then the final concern comes down to, yes, Canadians are ready for cuts to the public service. They've said that. They're ready for nation building projects. But for the public, they're laser focused on what they expect all of this to lead to, which is a lower cost of living for them. And that's going to take time, even if it works. And I also think polls are starting to show that public concern is, of course, it was all Trump for months, right? Now it's still Trump and related to the economy, but its cost of living is coming back to the forefront because the cost of living is much higher. I say when I give these interviews, I do the food purchasing for my family. And anyone who thinks that food has gone up barely a little or consistent with the headline inflation rate of 1 to 3 with a guideline of 2, they don't know what they're talking about. The cost of food is outstripping that. And the final thing is, if the government's going to spend more and also achieve lower spending on the operating side, the spending has to be lower than the economic growth of the country. And Canada's record of the way this is defined is GDP per capita, gross domestic product per each person. That's not gross GDP, because you raise that by bringing in immigrants. That's what they did. But what happens is the piece of the pie gets smaller for everybody. And we know from very credible nonpartisan experts that Canada has one of the worst records, at least in the last decade, of GDP growth per capita. And the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, if we don't get our act together, it's going to be that way. We're going to be the lowest in the OECD, which are developed countries, for like half a century. So, again, I want this government to succeed on these things. I hope they do have these projects, and they're have a way to make the civil service more efficient. We should all hope that. But it's the old, what was the Ronald Reagan warning? Trust but verify.
That's right. Well, Brian, speaking of some things that had to be verified, we finally found out that Mark Carney and President Donald Trump spoke. It had the relationship had been frosty for some time, but now we have found out that Prime Minister Carney has spoken to the president a couple of times in the last couple of weeks, as recently as Monday. We have the head of the Privy Council is down in Washington right now to talk about trade and tariffs and all of that, and sort of setting the stage for the big negotiation of the USMCA next year. But it's still it's interesting. Normally, after these world leaders speak, there's sort of what we call a readout, either from Canada or the United States. Trump's people didn't put anything out. Carney's people, it's almost like they didn't want us to know that he spoke with Donald Trump. But this has been such a big key to moving many of these economic issues forward.
We found out that Carney and Trump had spoken because Trump told us. He was talking about the Golden Dome the other day and said, "Oh, Canada called. Canada wants in. They want to be part of it." That's how we're finding out our own domestic policy, is watching Fox News and finding out what Trump says about Canada. Yeah, there are normally readouts. They didn't do it. Interesting, at the cabinet retreat, they were supposed to have a guy named Kevin Roberts speak. He is the president of the Heritage Foundation, massive think tank in Washington, and despite how they're described by most of the media in Canada as controversial and all of that, no, they're very middle of the road, standard Republican think tank. But this guy was key to the Project 2025 document that came out last year ahead of the election, and he was supposed to speak to Carney's cabinet to tell them how. What is the mood? What is it like? What is the thinking behind what's going on in Washington in Trump world? I guess that's better than what the embassy did, which was hire a Democrat firm to tell them how to understand conservative media in the States. Anyways, he was supposed to be there. He canceled at the last minute. I think it was probably a smart move to try and talk to him, or people like him. Unfortunately, when Danielle Smith does that with Ben Shapiro, it's controversial. When Carney does it, CBC just puts out a piece explaining how good this is. If this were Pierre Poilievre talking to this guy to find out how to deal with Trump, you know that the whole gallery would be lighting their hair on fire about this. But look, you've got to talk to Trump. You got to talk to people around him. You got to figure out how to get a deal, and quit telling me that we can't get a deal and a deal can't be had. Other countries have deals. We can get one too.
Last word to you on this, Lorrie. From hearing from on the American side, particularly with Canada took down its retaliatory tariffs a couple of weeks ago, but those that remain, of course, are on aluminum, steel, and the auto industry. Those are still there. You hear from the so-called American experts, and they're saying, look, this is where there can be a deal done, because the United States, which wants to fundamentally change their economy and to build and to drill and to have everything done there. Trillions of dollars of investments coming in since President Trump came back to office in January. But where Canada has an opportunity is on aluminum and steel, because the US wants to build houses. They have a shortage. They want to build. There's some move there. There's some room there, it would seem. But why Canada just can't seem to get over the hill when it comes to that?
Certainly true. The biggest concern I have is how, and I wrote about it in today's column, how Carney has shifted the goalposts of what a good deal means. At the beginning, you recall, it was dollar for dollar retaliatory tariffs. We're going to get rid of all of them. That was the original position. In fairness to Mr. Carney, by the time he became prime minister, he went, well, we can't do dollar for dollar because their economy is 10 times the size of ours. After winning the election, he started lowering expectations on the issue of removing all the tariffs. He said, I believe it was in June, well, look, no other country has been able to remove all the tariffs, which is a signal that we're not going to remove all of them, now. On Wednesday, he was asked, well, when's this deal going to come and what are we going to get from it? And his response was, well, we have the lowest average tariff rate in the world right now. That's action. Okay, but the only reason you have that is the Canada-US-Mexico agreement that was signed in 2020 between the previous Liberal government and Donald Trump. So I guess what he's arguing now is, well, we were able to stop Trump from blowing up Christmas, so that the vast majority, I think it's our average tariff rate, they said, is 5.2% compared to a global rate of 15% and up. But the renegotiation of Christmas starts next year. So in other words, Now we have, like, it sounds like he said on Wednesday, oh, the work's done. We have the best deal in Canada. No, you have it because of CUSMA. You have it because Trump hasn't blown it up. But that comes due next year, and then we're going to have to wait and see what happens. So Carney, look, Mr. Trump changes his mind, I agree. But Carney has gone on this journey from, and then remember the deadlines. There was going to be a July 21st deadline, an August 1st deadline by Canada. Neither of those things happened. So then it became no deal is better than a bad deal. And now we're talking about, well, we still might be able to do something on the big ones now, which are the sectoral tariffs that you mentioned. Look how far Carney has gone from everything, all of it, to no deal's better than a bad deal, and we're still working on it. He raised the expectations during the election. He was the former head of the Bank of England and Canada. He knew how to deal with this. Look, his relationship with Trump, the latest is they seem to be buddies. But that doesn't mean anything. It's what's in the deal, what are the agreements. So I hope and we don't know. We literally don't know. I hope when we see a deal, if there is one, we're all going to be going, holy cow, they really pulled it off. But based on the sort of diminishing definition of what a good deal is, I'm concerned.
Well, as the issue of Donald Trump starts to wane in Canadians' mind, they are focusing their attention on their budgets. And will Mark Carney's budget deliver for Canadians? Time will tell. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Go to the TorontoSun.com. You'll find commentary and coverage there you will not find anywhere else.